Margot Finch was elbow-deep in English soil when propriety arrived to judge her. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching across the lawn, too focused on directing Samuel to angle the ornamental pear tree 3 degrees west, because the afternoon light would hit it wrong otherwise, and she refused to plant 15 guineas worth of Pyrus Calleriana, only to have it look sickly by August. The tree had already been dropped twice by the hauling team, her boots were caked in mud past the ankle, and her hair had abandoned its pins somewhere around mid-morning. "Careful with the root ball, Sam." She pushed a stray curl from her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of dirt. "If you compact the soil now, we'll be replanting in a month." Samuel grunted acknowledgement. The 4 other men on her crew worked around the south garden bed, their movements efficient from 3 years of following her sometimes peculiar instructions. They'd learned she was usually right about the peculiar bits. Just there. Yes, exactly. Margot stepped back to survey the placement, squinting against the spring sun. Perfect. The tree would frame the view from the morning room without blocking the rose garden beyond. She grinned. Brilliant. Now let's get it settled before— What on earth is happening to my gardens? The voice cut across the lawn with all the warmth of a January frost. Margot turned to find a tall figure striding toward them, dark hair slightly disheveled, expression hovering somewhere between horror and outrage. Viscount Gabriel Thorne, owner of said gardens, had apparently returned from London a day early. "Milord?" She wiped her hands on her work apron, already filthy, so what did it matter, and straightened. "We're installing the ornamental pears, as discussed in the plans you approved 3 weeks ago." "I approved plans drawn on paper." He stopped 5 feet away, gaze sweeping over her crew, the disrupted lawn, the holes currently dotting what had been a perfectly manicured expanse of grass. His jaw tightened. "I did not approve this chaos." Samuel muttered something under his breath. Margot shot him a quelling look. "Chaos is temporary, Lord Thorne. Beauty is permanent." She gestured to the carefully staged plants waiting their turn. "By June you'll have a garden that makes grown men weep. Right now you have dirt. It's the price of transformation." "And is it also the price of transformation to have my household staff subjected to—" He glanced at her crew, lowered his voice slightly. "That sort of language?" Margot blinked. "What language?" "I distinctly heard one of your men use profanity, in mixed company." "Oh, right." Jenkins had made a spectacularly crude joke about root systems 5 minutes ago, and she'd laughed hard enough to nearly drop her spade, because it was funny, and because she'd been working alongside men since she was 16 and had heard far worse. "Milord, with respect, there is no mixed company present. Only workers doing their jobs." His expression shifted, something complicated flickering behind those dark eyes. Concern? Condescension? "Miss Finch, you are a woman. It is inappropriate for these men to speak so freely in your presence." The crew had gone very still. Margot felt heat climb her neck, not embarrassment, but anger held on a tight leash. "These men work for me, Lord Thorne. I am their employer. They answer to my instructions, my standards, and my approval." She met his gaze steadily. "You contracted my business to redesign these gardens. You did not contract my obedience." Colour rose in his face. "I did not mean to suggest— Gabriel, darling, you've returned." The new voice was light, feminine, and edged with steel wrapped in silk. Lady Beatrice Thorne swept across the lawn like a ship in full sail, black skirts immaculate, posture military straight despite her age. Behind her trailed 2 other women, both fashionably dressed, both wearing expressions of barely concealed curiosity. Margot's stomach sank. She knew exactly what they saw. A woman dressed in men's work trousers, hair falling loose, dirt smeared across her face, standing in the middle of torn-up gardens, surrounded by labourers. "Aunt Beatrice." Gabriel's voice had gone carefully neutral. "I didn't expect you until Thursday." Lady Helmsworth and Miss Pemberley were eager to see the famous gardens. Beatrice's gaze swept the destruction, then landed on Margot with the precision of a rifle shot. "Although it seems we've arrived at an unfortunate moment, we're in the middle of installation," Margot said evenly. "The gardens will be restored to beauty within—" "How extraordinary." Beatrice moved closer, examining Margot like a curiosity in a museum. "Gabriel, darling, I wasn't aware you'd hired additional groundskeepers. and such unconventional ones. Miss Finch is not a groundskeeper. Gabriel's voice was tight. She is a landscape designer. I hired her firm to redesign the gardens entirely. Her firm. Beatrice repeated the words as though tasting something sour. How modern, Lady Helmsworth tittered. Miss Pemberley's eyes were wide with something between shock and delight at the scandal of it all. Margot felt the familiar burn of being categorized, dismissed, found amusing. She'd spent 10 years building her father's struggling gardening business into something respected, something that attracted clients from 3 counties. She'd learned to read soil composition, to understand light and drainage and the temperament of 40 different rose varieties. She'd negotiated contracts with men twice her age and proven herself through results, not charm. And still, always, there were moments like this, when all her expertise dissolved into impropriety simply because she'd been born into the wrong body for her chosen work. "If you'll excuse me," she said, voice level despite the fury simmering beneath. "We have 3 more trees to install before the light fails." She turned back to her crew without waiting for permission to be dismissed. Behind her she heard Beatrice's voice, pitched to Carrie. "Gabriel, we must discuss appropriate supervision of staff. One cannot allow standards to slip simply because the help comes with unusual credentials." Margot's hands clenched around her spade. Samuel caught her eye, raised an eyebrow in question. She shook her head minutely. Not worth it. Never worth it. They had 5 weeks left on this contract. 5 weeks to transform these gardens, collect the final payment that would clear her father's debts and secure her business for another year, and never think about Viscount Gabriel Thorne or his insufferable aunt again. She could survive 5 weeks of anything, even if it meant swallowing her pride with every sunrise. The argument happened 3 hours later, after Beatrice and her companions had departed and the crew had packed up for the evening. Margot was doing a final check of the newly planted trees when Gabriel appeared at her elbow, startling her into nearly dropping her watering can. "Miss Finch, a word, if you please." She set down the can with deliberate care. "Of course, my lord. I must apologize for my aunt's behavior this afternoon. She can be traditional in her views." "Traditional?" Margot kept her voice neutral. "Is that what we're calling it?" His jaw tightened. "She meant no genuine offense." "Didn't she?" Margot wiped her hands on her apron, exhaustion and frustration finally fraying her professional restraint. "Lord Thorne, your aunt called me the help in front of her friends and suggested I required supervision like a wayward child. I assure you, offense was very much intended." "You don't understand the delicacy of what, social propriety?" She laughed, the sound sharper than she meant it. "I understand perfectly well, my lord. I understand that I could be the most talented designer in England and still be judged first on my sex and my station. I understand that wearing trousers to do physical labor makes me unsuitable for polite company. I understand that my presence here embarrasses you." "That is not what I—" "Then what are you saying?" She faced him fully, too tired to maintain careful deference. "Because from where I stand, you've spent the afternoon apologizing for my existence rather than defending the work you hired me to do." Silence stretched between them. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh-turned earth and apple blossoms from the orchard beyond. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. Gabriel's expression was unreadable in the fading light. "I am not accustomed to unconventional arrangements. I noticed. My late wife was—" He stopped, started again. "The women of my acquaintance do not typically engage in manual labor. How terribly boring for them." His lips twitched, surprise maybe, or suppressed amusement. "You are remarkably impertinent. You are remarkably concerned with propriety over results." Margot picked up her watering can again. "Lord Thorne, you hired me because Lady Ashworth recommended my work after I redesigned her rose garden. You signed a contract promising 6 weeks and full payment upon completion. I have every intention of fulfilling my end of that bargain with professionalism and expertise." She met his gaze squarely. "What I will not do is apologize for being female while doing so. If that makes you uncomfortable, we can dissolve the contract now. I'll replant your old gardens, you'll pay the cancellation fee, and we'll both move on with our lives." It was a bluff. She desperately needed this job, this payment, but she'd learned long ago that showing desperation only invited exploitation. Gabriel studied her for a long moment. In the dimming light, his features were all sharp angles and shadows. That won't be necessary. No, no. He straightened, something shifting in his posture. Resolution, perhaps. You are correct. I hired you for your expertise. The contract stands. Relief flooded through her, quickly suppressed. Thank you, my lord. However, his voice firmed, I will be taking a more active role in the garden renovation going forward to ensure the work progresses smoothly. Margot's relief curdled instantly into suspicion. What does active role mean, exactly? Simply that I will be present during the work, available for consultation, providing oversight. Oversight. She repeated the word flatly. Lord Thorne, I don't need oversight, I need space to work. Nevertheless, his tone brooked no argument. My aunt was correct about one thing. I have been neglectful in my duties as property owner. That changes tomorrow. He turned and walked back toward the house before she could formulate a response sharp enough to match her irritation. Margot stared after him, jaw clenched, hands gripping the watering can hard enough to make her knuckles ache. 5 weeks suddenly seemed like an eternity. Gabriel appeared at dawn with tea. Margot, who'd arrived an hour earlier to mark out the day's planting beds, nearly jumped out of her skin when he materialized beside her, holding 2 steaming cups. Good morning, Miss Finch. He offered one cup with uncomfortable formality, as though they were at a garden party rather than standing in dew-soaked grass. I thought you might appreciate refreshment. She accepted the cup warily. That's thoughtful. Thank you. Shall I help you with those stakes? What? He gestured to the wooden stakes and string she'd been using to mark the perennial bed. May I assist? Margot blinked. Viscount Gabriel Thorne, in his perfectly pressed trousers and pristine lawn shirt, wanted to help her with manual labor. This was either genuine olive branch or some elaborate joke. Do you know how to properly mark a planting bed? How difficult can it be? One simply places the stakes. He picked up a stake, examined it as though it might contain hidden complexities, then drove it confidently into the ground. Margot winced. That's secure. He tested it with a firm shake. The stake wobbled alarmingly. Perfectly secure. Right. She set down her tea and moved to correct his work. Except you've placed it 6 inches off the planned line, and at an angle that will have my string sagging by mid-morning. He frowned. It looks straight to me. It looks straight to someone who's never strung a guideline. She pulled up his stake, repositioned it with practiced efficiency, and drove it down until it was properly seated. There, that's straight. I don't see the difference. You will when we plant according to the string and everything grows in crooked. She handed him another stake. Try again. This time, check your alignment against the edge of the terrace. For the next 20 minutes, Gabriel attempted to help with progressively disastrous results. He placed stakes at wrong intervals, tangled string into an impressive knot, and somehow managed to trip over a perfectly flat marking line and nearly topple into the bare soil bed. Margot caught his elbow just in time. Steady. Thank you. He straightened, dignity severely compromised by the mud now coating his left boot. I may be less helpful than anticipated. Maybe. She fought back a smile. Lord Thorne, with all respect, you are a menace to gardening. I am not. He stopped, caught her expression, and something surprising happened. His mouth curved into a self-deprecating smile that transformed his entire face from severe to almost boyish. I am absolutely a menace to gardening. Catastrophically so. In my defense, I do appreciate gardens. I simply appear to lack any practical ability to create them. Appreciation and creation are very different skills. Margot took the tangled string from his hands before he could make it worse. Perhaps you could help by observing, providing aesthetic input. You're benching me from my own garden renovation. I'm utilizing your strengths while protecting your gardens from your enthusiastic incompetence. He laughed, a genuine surprised sound that made him seem suddenly younger than his 33 years. You are possibly the most insubordinate contractor I've ever employed. You've hired boring contractors then. She began efficiently unknotting his string disaster. Besides, you did say you wanted to be actively involved. I'm involving you, just at a safe distance from anything that can be broken. Fair enough. He settled onto a nearby stone bench, apparently content to watch her work. Tell me about the perennials you're planning here. Mostly hardy salvias, some Russian sage for height, black-eyed Susans for color contrast. She worked as she talked, hands moving through familiar motions. The goal is 4-season interest with native species that won't require constant maintenance. Why native species? Because they're already adapted to your soil and climate. Less water, less fuss, and the local bees will actually use them. She glanced up. You do want bees, yes? For the fruit trees. I hadn't considered bees. Then it's fortunate you hired someone who does. She finished the string line, tested its tension. Gardening isn't just making things pretty, it's creating ecosystems. He was quiet for a moment, watching her work. You speak about it like art. It is art, living art. She moved to the next corner stake. My father used to say every garden tells a story. You just have to know what language the plants speak. Your father taught you the trade. Everything I know. The familiar ache settled in her chest. He started the business 30 years ago, built it from nothing, and you inherited it. 2 years ago. She didn't elaborate on the debts, the creditors, the desperate scramble to keep everything from collapsing. He would have been pleased to see it still standing. I have no doubt he would be proud of what you've accomplished. The unexpected kindness in his voice made her throat tight. She focused on her string, on the precise angles, on anything but the surprising thoughtfulness of this aristocrat who'd been such a rigid prig yesterday. The crew arrived at 7, greeting Margot and eyeing Gabriel with obvious wariness. To his credit, he remained on his bench, offering nothing more than polite nods while her men worked. He didn't interfere, didn't criticize, didn't make pompous pronouncements about proper procedure. He simply watched, occasionally asking questions that showed actual curiosity rather than condescension. It was unexpected. Also unexpected. The way Jenkins made another spectacularly inappropriate joke around 10 o'clock, and Gabriel, instead of looking scandalized, nearly choked on his tea trying not to laugh. Margot caught his eye across the garden bed. He shrugged, expression sheepish. Perhaps 5 weeks wouldn't be complete torture after all. Lady Beatrice returned on the 3rd day with reinforcements. Margot was demonstrating proper pruning technique to Gabriel, who had, astonishingly, asked to learn when the sound of approaching voices made them both look up. Beatrice swept into view with 3 other women of similar age and similar expressions of righteous concern. A delegation, then. Never good. Gabriel, darling. Beatrice's smile was sharp enough to prune roses. I've brought the Ladies' Charitable Committee to tour your gardens. We're considering venue options for the summer benefit. Aunt, this isn't the best time. Nonsense. The gardens are gardens, are they not? She turned to Margot with lethal courtesy. You won't mind clearing away your equipment while we walk? Margot set down her shears with careful control. Actually, Lady Beatrice, we're in the middle of instruction. If you could return in an hour. Instruction? One of the other women, Lady Morton, based on her imperious bearing, looked between Gabriel and Margot with dawning horror. Viscount Thorne, you cannot possibly be taking gardening instruction from a landscape designer, Margot supplied coldly. The term you're searching for is landscape designer. Employed person, Lady Morton corrected, as though Margot hadn't spoken. Gabriel, this is highly irregular. It's horticulture, Gabriel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Simple education in property management. It's inappropriate. Beatrice moved closer, voice dropping to a stage whisper clearly meant for Margot to hear. Darling, people are beginning to talk. A young woman, unchaperoned, spending hours daily in your company. Your late wife has been gone barely 4 years. 4 years is hardly barely. And already there are whispers about unsuitable attachments. The words hung in the air like poison. Margot felt her face flame, not from embarrassment but from pure rage at the calculated cruelty of it. Beatrice knew exactly what she was doing, implying impropriety, suggesting Margot was some sort of social climber, angling for a position so far above her station. It was laughable. There is no attachment, Gabriel said firmly, suitable or otherwise. Miss Finch is an employee fulfilling a contract. Margot told herself. The sharp pain in her chest was anger, nothing more. Of course, Beatrice's smile was all false warmth. And we merely wish to protect your reputation, darling. Perhaps the young woman could complete her work during hours when you're occupied with estate business, to avoid any further misunderstanding. It was a clever trap. If Gabriel agreed, he was essentially banishing Margot to work unsupervised, which would give Beatrice ammunition to criticize the final results. If he refused, he validated the implication that there was something to hide. That won't be necessary. The words came from Margot, not Gabriel. All eyes turned to her. She met Beatrice's gaze levelly. Lord Thorne's presence during work hours is stipulated in our contract as a matter of client consultation. I assure you, Lady Beatrice, my interest in your nephew extends precisely as far as his willingness to approve garden design choices. It was professionally phrased and absolutely cutting. Lady Morton gasped. One of the other women made a strangled sound. Beatrice's eyes went cold. How forthright. I find honesty saves time. Margot turned to Gabriel, who looked caught between horror and something that might have been admiration. My lord, shall we resume the pruning lesson? Or would you prefer I work independently for the remainder of the day? She was giving him an out, a chance to distance himself from the awkwardness, to appease his aunt and her committee. Gabriel looked at her, then at Beatrice, then back at her. We'll resume the lesson, he said quietly. Ladies, if you'll excuse us. Beatrice's expression went glacial. Gabriel, the benefit committee is welcome to tour the gardens when they're completed in 5 weeks. Until then, I must insist on not interrupting the work. Good day, Aunt. He turned back to Margot, picked up his shears, and waited with deliberate patience for her to continue the instruction. Behind him, Beatrice's face went through several complicated emotions before settling on cold fury. We shall discuss this later, Gabriel. She swept away, her committee trailing behind like confused ducklings. When they were gone, Margot released a shaky breath. That was badly handled on my part. Gabriel set down the shears. I should have defended your presence more firmly from the start. Instead, I made it seem as though there was something inappropriate about our working relationship. You told her we'd continue the lesson, after you'd already been insulted and I'd already failed to prevent it. He met her eyes. I apologize, Miss Finch. Sincerely. The apology surprised her more than the insult had. Men of his station rarely apologized to women of hers, and never with such clear regret. Accepted, she said carefully. Though you should know, this won't end here. Your aunt is not the type to accept defiance gracefully. I'm aware. Something complicated crossed his face. Beatrice has been protective since Catherine died, perhaps overly so. Catherine, his late wife. Margot had heard the brief facts. Married young, died of fever after less than 2 years, no children. The usual tragedy of aristocratic life. Grief makes people controlling sometimes, she offered. They think if they can just manage everything correctly, they can prevent more loss. He looked at her with surprise. That's remarkably perceptive. My mother died when I was 19. My father tried to wrap me in cotton wool for a solid year before I finally convinced him I wouldn't shatter. She picked up her shears again. Shall we continue? These roses won't prune themselves. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, before Gabriel spoke again. For what it's worth, I don't find your presence inappropriate. I find it refreshing. Margot's hands stilled on the rose cane. Refreshing? You say what you think. You don't perform elaborate social dances to avoid directness. He smiled slightly. It's like breathing clean air after being trapped in a stuffy room. The compliment settled warm in her chest, dangerous in its sincerity. Lord Thorne. Gabriel. He cut another stem, surprisingly careful with the angle. If we're to spend 5 weeks in forced proximity, we might as well use given names, at least when the ladies' charitable committee isn't watching. That seems inappropriate. His smile turned wry. We've already been accused of worse, might as well earn the scandal. Margot laughed, despite herself. Very well, Gabriel, though I maintain the right to return to formality when your aunt appears. A wise policy. He examined his pruning work critically. Did I just murder this poor rose? She looked at his cut and bit back a smile. You definitely wounded it, but it will survive. Rather like this entire arrangement, then. Rather like, she agreed, and tried very hard to ignore the fact that his company was becoming dangerously less bothersome by the day. The incident with the bees happened on day 9. Gabriel had insisted on helping transfer the new hive boxes to the orchard edge, despite Margot's repeated warnings that help in this context mainly meant stand very still and don't panic. He'd been doing admirably until a particularly adventurous bee investigated his collar. Don't move, Margot said calmly. She's just curious. There is a bee inside my shirt. His voice was remarkably controlled for someone clearly terrified. Margot, there is a bee inside my shirt. Yes, and if you stay calm, she'll leave peacefully. What if I'm allergic? Are you allergic? I have no idea. I've never been stung. The bee emerged from his collar, circled his head twice, and departed for more interesting flowers. Gabriel released a breath. That was... Another bee landed on his nose. Margot watched his eyes cross, trying to focus on it, his entire body going rigid with obvious effort, not to swat at his own face. The bee sat there for an eternal 3 seconds before flying away. I think they like you, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I think they're plotting my demise. Bees are far too busy for murder. They have flowers to visit and honey to make. These bees are clearly making time in their schedule for intimidation. He rubbed his nose vigorously. How do you tolerate this regularly? I respect them, they respect me. She grinned. Also, I don't flail around like I'm being attacked by dragons. I did not flail. You absolutely flailed. I was being strategically cautious. You looked like a man fighting invisible opponents. She couldn't help it. She laughed, bright and delighted. Your face when it went up your nose. I'm glad my terror amuses you. Immensely. She wiped her eyes. Gabriel, you're a Viscount. You've probably faced down House of Lords debates and estate crises. How are you defeated by insects? House of Lords debates don't have stingers. Fair point. She sobered slightly, still smiling. Come on. We need to finish positioning the hives before the colony gets agitated. They worked together for the next hour, Gabriel maintaining a healthy distance from the actual bees while helping carry equipment. Despite his obvious nervousness, he didn't abandon the task or complain beyond the occasional muttered observation about humanity's questionable decision to domesticate creatures with natural weapons. By the time they finished, both were sweaty, dirt-streaked, and exhausted. Margot collapsed onto the grass beneath an apple tree. After a moment's hesitation, Gabriel joined her. I have a confession, he said. You're secretly terrified of all insects, not just bees. Besides that, he plucked a blade of grass, rolled it between his fingers. I never wanted to inherit this title. The admission surprised her into silence. My older brother was meant to be Viscount, Edward. He was perfect for it, charming, socially adept, ambitious. Gabriel's voice went distant. I was meant to be the spare who dabbled in botany and stayed quietly in the background. What happened? Riding accident. 5 years ago. He was quiet a moment. Suddenly I was Viscount Thorne, managing estates I'd never prepared for, navigating social expectations I'd never learned, married to a woman I barely knew because Edward had arranged the match and I couldn't break the contract after his death. Margot processed this carefully. You didn't love your wife? I barely knew her. We were married 6 months. She was kind, but we were strangers, playing roles. He met her eyes. Does that make me terrible? It makes you honest. She drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. My father wanted me to marry the grocer's son. Nice boy, steady income, respectful man. Would have been a perfectly pleasant life. But I wanted dirt under my fingernails and calluses on my palms, and the satisfaction of creating something that would outlive me. She smiled wryly. We're both disappointments to our expected paths, I suppose. Except you chose yours. I had mine chosen for me. You're choosing now, though. Learning to prune roses, getting terrorized by bees, that's not the behavior of a man simply fulfilling obligation. He was quiet for a long moment. Beatrice thinks I should remarry, properly this time, to someone suitable. Something cold settled in Margot's stomach. Suitable meaning titled and rich. Suitable meaning everything I'm not. Comfortable with society, skilled at managing households, content with the role. He pulled up another blade of grass. She's already suggested 3 candidates. And? Margot kept her voice carefully neutral, as though his answer didn't matter. And I find the thought exhausting. He glanced at her. I've spent 5 years being what everyone expected. I'm tired of performance. Their eyes held for a beat too long. Something shifted in the air between them. Dangerous, electric, impossible to ignore. Margot looked away first. We should get back. Still have the herb garden to lay out before evening. Right. Yes. He stood, offered her a hand up. When their palms touched, the contact felt like burning. She released his hand quickly and headed back toward the main gardens, very deliberately not analyzing why her heart was racing. This was a job. A contract. 5 weeks that would end with payment and departure. Nothing more. She repeated that to herself all the way back to the house, trying to make it feel true. Week 2 brought unseasonable rain and forced them into the orangery, a glass-enclosed conservatory where they could continue work on potted specimens while waiting for the weather to clear. It also brought closer quarters, warmer air, and absolutely no chaperoning witnesses. This one's dying, Gabriel observed, examining a sickly lemon tree. This one's been dying for months, Margot corrected. Look at the leaf tips. See that brown edge? Classic underwatering combined with poor drainage. I water regularly. You drown regularly, there's a difference. She tipped the pot, showed him the waterlogged soil. The roots are suffocating. They need oxygen as much as moisture. Plants breathe. Everything breathes. She began carefully loosening the root ball. Here, help me repot this. You need to learn the difference between moist and soggy. For the next 20 minutes, she guided him through proper repotting. When to trim roots, how to layer drainage material, the precise pressure needed to settle soil without compacting it. He was surprisingly attentive, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite attention. There, she brushed soil from her hands. Give it proper drainage and bright light, and it'll recover. You make it sound simple. It is simple. People just overcomplicate it. She moved to the next specimen. This orchid, though, this is genuinely dead. You can't save what's already gone. How do you know the difference? Experience, intuition, acceptance that sometimes, despite your best efforts, things die anyway. She met his eyes. You can't control everything, Gabriel. Not plants, not people, not fate. Something in his expression cracked open. Catherine was supposed to survive. The doctor said the fever would break. Margot set down her tools. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. No one mentions that I barely knew her, that I grieved losing my brother more than losing a wife I'd spent 6 months living politely beside. He laughed, the sound bitter. What does that make me? Human. She kept her voice gentle. Gabriel, you don't have to love someone just because they died. Grief isn't a moral requirement. Beatrice thinks I haven't mourned properly, that I'm rushing into... He stopped abruptly. Into what? Nothing. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. Margot could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the careful way he wasn't quite meeting her eyes. She thinks you're rushing into interest in someone unsuitable, she said quietly. Someone like me. His silence was answer enough. Gabriel, your aunt is wrong about many things, but she's right about one. I am unsuitable. Margot forced herself to say the words clearly. I have dirt under my fingernails and opinions in my mouth, and absolutely no interest in becoming a decorative aristocrat. Even if you were interested, which you're not, it would be impossible. What if I am? The words hung between them like the humidity in the air, thick, inescapable, impossible to ignore. Margot's heart kicked against her ribs. Don't. Don't what? Don't make this complicated. She turned away, focusing blindly on the orchid's dead roots. We have 3.5 weeks left. Let's finish the work and part as friendly professionals. What if I don't want friendly and professional? Then you're being foolish. She kept her voice steady through sheer will. I'm not... I can't be what Beatrice expects. I won't shapeshift myself into a proper lady to ease your social obligations. I'm not asking you to. You will, eventually. She finally looked at him. Gabriel, I've seen this pattern. Men who find women like me refreshing when they're bored with their own circles. It's novelty, not genuine interest. When novelty fades, they remember why they're supposed to marry suitable women. You think I'm toying with you. I think you're lonely and grieving and looking for something different. She gentled her tone. I think you're a good man who doesn't realize he's wandering into something that will hurt us both. He moved closer, not touching but near enough she could feel his warmth in the humid air. And if you're wrong, I'm not. Margot, we should focus on the gardens. She stepped back, putting deliberate distance between them. That's what you're paying me for, not whatever this is. He studied her for a long moment, expression unreadable, then nodded slowly. As you wish, Miss Finch. The return to formality stung more than it should have. They worked the rest of the afternoon in stilted silence. The easy companionship of previous days fractured into careful politeness. When Margot left that evening, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained grey. She told herself the ache in her chest was just exhaustion, told herself she'd made the right choice, told herself that protecting her heart was worth the loneliness, almost believed it. Beatrice struck at the 3-week mark. Margot arrived at the estate to find a different crew working her gardens, men she'd never seen before, tearing up the carefully planted perennial beds. What are you doing? She ran toward them, horror flooding her system. Stop! Those are Russian sage. You can't just... Orders from Lady Beatrice, the foreman said with zero sympathy. Says the plants are wrong. Need to be replaced with proper English roses. Proper? Margot's hands clenched into fists. Those plants are native species specifically chosen for this ecosystem. Where's Lord Thorne? In London, back tonight. Of course. Beatrice had waited until Gabriel was gone to make her move. This is sabotage. Margot's voice shook with fury. You're destroying weeks of work. Take it up with Lady Beatrice. The foreman turned back to his men. Keep clearing. Margot found Beatrice in the morning room, taking tea with 2 other ladies. Miss Finch. Beatrice's smile was poisonous sweetness. I hope you don't mind. I've taken the liberty of correcting some unfortunate choices in the garden design. You've destroyed 3 weeks of installation. I've improved it. Really, dear native plants. So pedestrian. She sipped her tea delicately. Gabriel's gardens deserve better than wildflowers. Those aren't wildflowers, they're carefully selected. I don't require botanical lectures from the help. Beatrice set down her cup with deliberate precision. You may have charmed my nephew with your rustic enthusiasm, but I am not so easily swayed. The new roses will be installed today. You will adjust your plans accordingly, and we will say no more about it. I have a contract, which specifies my nephew's approval of final design, not yours. Beatrice's expression went cold. You presume too much, Miss Finch. You always have. Gabriel is a Viscount. You are a woman who plays in dirt. The gap between you is not charming. It's inappropriate. The sooner you accept that, the better for everyone. The other ladies watched with avid interest, clearly delighted by the drama. Margot felt the familiar burning in her throat, not tears, but rage and humiliation and the horrible knowledge that Beatrice was right about the social gap, even if she was wrong about everything else. I want Lord Thorne's written approval of these changes, she said, voice ice cold. Until I have that, your crew leaves my gardens alone. My crew doesn't answer to you. Then I'll have them removed by the magistrate for destruction of property under contract. Margot met Beatrice's eyes without flinching. Test me, Lady Beatrice. I've dealt with bullies before. You're just better dressed than most. For one electric moment, she thought Beatrice might actually explode. Then Gabriel's voice cut through the tension. What precisely is being removed by magistrate? He stood in the doorway, still in travelling clothes, expression thunderous. Relief and something more complicated flooded through Margot. Your aunt hired a crew to destroy the native plantings and replace them with roses, without your approval. Gabriel's gaze swung to Beatrice. You did what? I improved mediocre choices, darling. Those common plants were utterly unsuitable. They were specifically designed for the ecosystem. Miss Finch explained the reasoning 3 weeks ago when I approved the plans. His voice was controlled fury. You countermanded my explicit approval and destroyed contracted work. I was protecting your interests. No, Aunt. You are undermining me in my own home." He turned to the foreman, who'd appeared behind him, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Take your men and leave. Lady Beatrice will pay your fee for the day. The native plants stay." "Gabriel!" Beatrice stood, face flushed with anger. "You cannot seriously choose this woman's judgment over mine. I'm choosing the expertise I hired over the interference I didn't request." He glanced at Margot. "Miss Finch, please assess the damage and provide an estimate for repairs. I'll cover all additional costs." "Of course." Margot kept her voice professional despite wanting to either cheer or cry, or possibly both. "If you'll excuse me." She walked out with her head high, spine straight, refusing to show the trembling starting in her hands. Behind her, she heard Beatrice's voice rise. "This is about more than gardens, Gabriel. Can't you see what she's doing?" Margot didn't wait to hear his response. She went to her destroyed perennial beds and stared at the carnage, ripped plants, torn roots, weeks of careful work undone in hours. Then she rolled up her sleeves and started salvaging what could be saved. Gabriel found her 2 hours later, still working. "How bad is it?" 30% total loss, another 40% damaged but potentially recoverable. She didn't look up from carefully separating tangled root systems. "Could have been worse. I'm sorry." "Not your fault." "It is, actually." He knelt beside her in the dirt, expensive trousers be damned. "Beatrice is my responsibility. I should have set firmer boundaries from the start. She's grieving your brother and your wife, and probably her own mortality." Margot sat back on her heels. "People do terrible things when they're trying to control the uncontrollable. That doesn't excuse cruelty." "No, but understanding it makes it survivable." She met his eyes. "Gabriel, your aunt is right about one thing. There is a gap between us. Not in value, but in reality. You live in one world, I live in another. This contract is a temporary bridge, nothing more." "What if I don't want temporary?" Her heart stuttered. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because this ends the same way it always does." She forced herself to say it clearly. "You'll tire of the novelty, or society will pressure you. Or you'll realize a landscape gardener can't be a viscountess no matter how refreshing you find her. And I'll have broken my own rules about staying professional, and it will hurt, and I'll still need to finish these gardens and collect my payment and pretend nothing happened." "You think I'm that weak-willed?" "I think you're human." She returned to her salvage work. "I think you're lonely and I'm convenient, and this proximity feels like more than it is. And I think in 2 weeks when this contract ends, we'll both return to our normal lives and wonder what we were thinking." That's remarkably cynical. It's remarkably realistic. She carefully extracted a damaged sage plant. "Gabriel, I like you. Genuinely. You're kinder than I expected and funnier than you realize and surprisingly humble for a man with a title. But liking isn't enough to bridge the gap your aunt keeps pointing out." What would be enough? The question hung in the humid air. Margot set down her trowel. "I don't know. But I know it's not something we figure out in 5 weeks while I'm working in your gardens. That's not real life. That's a bubble. Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we finish the contract as professionals. You find a suitable woman who understands your world. I pay off my father's debts and build my business. We part as friendly acquaintances who shared a few weeks of pleasant conversation." She forced herself to smile. "It's the sensible choice." "I'm tired of sensible choices." "Then you're tired of being an adult." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "But that doesn't change reality." She walked away before he could argue further, before she could make the mistake of admitting that she was lying. That somewhere in the past 3 weeks, Gabriel Thorne had become more than a client or a pleasant distraction. That she woke each morning eager to see him. That his terrible gardening attempts made her laugh in ways she hadn't in years. That the thought of finishing this contract and never seeing him again felt like losing something vital. But wanting and having were different things, and Margot had learned long ago that women like her didn't get fairy tale endings. The letter arrived on day 26. Margot was putting finishing touches on the rose garden when Samuel brought it, looking uncomfortable. "This was delivered to the house. Lord Thorne's steward said to give it to you direct." The envelope was heavy stock, sealed with wax. Inside, a single sheet of paper in elegant handwriting. Miss Finch, you are invited to attend the summer benefit at Thorn House this Saturday evening. Your presence would honor me greatly. Gabriel below in different handwriting, sharp, controlled. All contractors and estate staff are naturally welcome. Do dress appropriately. Lady Beatrice Thorne. Margot stared at the dual messages, Gabriel extending genuine invitation, Beatrice making clear it was charity, not desire. You going? Samuel asked. Absolutely not. Might be wise. Show you're not intimidated. Or it might be walking into an ambush. She folded the letter carefully. I have work to do, Samuel. I don't have time for society games. But the invitation haunted her through the day. That evening, Gabriel found her doing final measurements for the kitchen garden. You received my invitation. I did. Thank you. But no. Why not? Because I don't belong at aristocratic benefits, Gabriel. I'd be a curiosity at best and an insult to your guests at worst. She kept her voice level. Besides, I have nothing appropriate to wear. That's easily solved. No. She cut him off firmly. I'm not letting you buy me a dress like I'm some sort of... She stopped, shook her head. No, the answer is no. Margot, he moved closer. I'm not asking you to come as my employee. I'm asking you to come as someone I'd like to share an evening with. Which is exactly why I shouldn't come. She faced him fully. Gabriel, every time your aunt sees us together, she becomes more vicious. Showing up at her benefit would be throwing fuel on flames. It's not worth it. What if I think you're worth it? The words hit like a physical blow. Margot closed her eyes briefly. Don't say things like that. Why not, if they're true? Because we only have 4 days left on this contract. Because you're going to wake up next week and realize this was just proximity and novelty. Because I'm trying very hard to protect both of us from doing something phenomenally stupid. Like what? Like falling for someone I can't have. The admission escaped before she could stop it. Silence stretched between them. Margot wanted to take back the words, to laugh them off as exaggeration, to rebuild the professional walls she'd been so carefully maintaining. But Gabriel was looking at her like she'd just handed him something precious. Can't have, he said quietly, or won't try for. Both. Same result. She picked up her measuring tape. Please don't make this harder than it already is. What if I told you I've been falling for weeks? That every moment with you makes my actual life feel colorless in comparison. That I go to bed thinking about your laugh and wake up eager to see what sharp observation you'll make about my botanical incompetence. Margot's hands stilled on the tape. Gabriel, come to the benefit. Not as my employee, as my guest. Let me spend one evening with you outside of gardens and contracts and your very sensible walls. Your aunt will be vicious. Let her. Gabriel, you don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. He took her hand, dirt and all. I'm asking you to trust me, for one evening. Can you do that? Margot looked at their joined hands, at his face open and earnest in the fading light, at the 4 days remaining on a contract that had become so much more complicated than plants and payment. One evening, she heard herself say, but I'm wearing my own clothes. And if your aunt's friends treat me like entertainment, I'm leaving. His smile could have lit the entire garden. Fair terms. This is a mistake. Probably. He squeezed her hand gently. But I'm tired of sensible choices, remember? We're both idiots. Exceptionally brilliant idiots, he corrected. Despite everything, the warnings screaming in her head, the certainty this would end badly, the knowledge she was breaking her own rules. Margot smiled. 4 days left. What harm could one evening do? The answer, as it turned out, was considerable harm. Margot arrived at the benefit in her best dress, a simple green muslin that she'd worn to exactly 2 other formal occasions, and immediately understood she'd made a catastrophic error. The women glittered like jewels in silks and satins, dripping with pearls and diamonds. The men wore evening coats so perfectly tailored they might have been sewn onto their bodies. Everyone moved with the casual confidence of people who belonged precisely where they were. Margot belonged in a garden. Miss Finch, Gabriel appeared at her elbow, impossibly handsome in formal black. You came. Against my better judgment. She kept her voice low. Gabriel, I don't... You look lovely. I look like a governess at a queen's ball. You look like yourself, which is considerably better than most of the performance happening in this room." He offered his arm. "Come, let me introduce you to people who'll appreciate your conversation over your dress." The evening started better than she'd feared. Gabriel introduced her to a botanist friend who'd heard of her work and wanted to discuss native plant cultivation. A middle-aged woman complimented the functional elegance of her dress and asked detailed questions about running a business. A young couple preparing to renovate their estate gardens took her card with genuine interest. For 30 minutes, Margot let herself believe this might actually work. Then Beatrice found them. "Gabriel, darling," she swept up with another woman in tow, tall, blonde, beautiful, in an ice sculpture way. "You remember Lady Victoria Ashford? She's just returned from Paris." "Lady Victoria," Gabriel bowed politely. "Welcome back to England." "Lord Thorne," Victoria's smile was practiced perfection. "How wonderful to see you again. Beatrice has told me all about the renovations you're undertaking." "Miss Finch is the true architect of the gardens," Gabriel said, gesturing to Margot. "Lady Victoria, may I introduce—" "How charming that you give credit to your staff," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "So generous of you, truly." The dismissal was surgical in its precision. Margot felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not precisely staff." "Of course not. Contractor, was it?" Beatrice's smile was venomous. "How modern. Gabriel has such progressive views about these matters." "Indeed." Victoria moved fractionally closer to Gabriel, claiming territory. "I've been meaning to visit. Beatrice says your roses will be spectacular this year." "The native plantings will be the true feature," Gabriel said firmly. "Miss Finch has created an ecosystem that will sustain itself for decades." "How practical." Victoria's tone suggested practicality ranked somewhere below plague. "Though I confess I prefer the romance of traditional English gardens, don't you think there's something to be said for classic beauty?" She directed the question at Gabriel, but her meaning was clear. Margot was practical. Victoria was classic beauty. "I think beauty and function aren't mutually exclusive," Gabriel said carefully. "Oh, but sometimes one must choose." Victoria's laugh was like crystal chiming. "One cannot have everything, after all." Beatrice watched the exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. Margot felt the trap closing around her. This wasn't just social maneuvering. This was an execution. Beatrice had brought Victoria specifically to demonstrate what Gabriel should want, what he could have if he abandoned his progressive views. "If you'll excuse me," Margot said quietly. "I believe I need some air." She walked away before Gabriel could protest, before she could say something cutting that would only confirm every terrible thing Beatrice thought about her. The gardens were cool and dark, mercifully empty of glittering people. Margot pressed her palms against a stone wall and breathed. This was why she'd said no. This was why she'd kept her walls up. Because eventually reality intruded. The reality that Gabriel Thorne moved in a world of Lady Victorias and society benefits and expectations she could never meet. "Miss Finch?" She turned to find the botanist friend from earlier. "Dr. Morrison, you look like you might need an ally." He smiled kindly. "Society events can be rather suffocating. I'm not usually invited to them. Consider yourself fortunate." He leaned against the wall beside her. "For what it's worth, Lady Beatrice is known for her matchmaking campaigns. She's been trying to pair Thorne with Victoria for months. Your presence here has clearly disrupted her plans." "I'm not trying to disrupt anything." "Perhaps not. But Thorne's been different since you started working here, lighter, more himself." Dr. Morrison studied her thoughtfully. "I've known Gabriel since university. He spent his entire marriage to Catherine being what everyone expected. It nearly crushed him." "He told you that?" "Not in so many words, but we were roommates for 3 years. I learned to read his silences." He straightened. "Whatever happens tonight, Miss Finch, don't let the Beatrices of this world convince you that their rules are absolute. Some of us would rather see our friend happy than appropriate." He left her with that thought. Margot stayed in the gardens another 10 minutes, gathering her courage before heading back inside. She found Gabriel cornered by Victoria and 3 other women, all vying for his attention. He looked politely trapped, like a man at his own execution trying to maintain dignity. When he saw Margot, relief flooded his expression. "Miss Finch, I was hoping— Lord Thorne, you promised to show me the orangery, Victoria interjected smoothly. I'm absolutely fascinated by exotic cultivation. Perhaps another time. I need to speak with Miss Finch about— Surely business can wait, one of the other women laughed. You work the poor girl too hard, Lord Thorne. Let her enjoy the party. They were dismissing her again, politely, elegantly, but dismissing nonetheless. And Gabriel, caught in the web of social obligation and propriety, hesitated just a fraction too long before responding. That hesitation told Margot everything. Actually, the gardens are nearly complete, she said clearly. We can discuss any remaining details tomorrow during work hours. Enjoy your evening, Lord Thorne. She turned and walked away. This time he didn't follow. Margot spent the rest of the evening helping arrange flowers in the servants' quarters, more comfortable company than the ballroom, and left the benefit without saying goodbye. She told herself it didn't matter. Told herself she'd been right all along. Told herself the tight pain in her chest was just vindication that protecting her heart had been the correct choice. By the time she reached home, she almost believed it. The next morning, she returned to the estate determined to finish the final 4 days with pure professionalism. Gabriel was already in the gardens waiting. Margot, about last night, nothing to discuss. She set down her equipment with precise care. The gardens are 95% complete. I'll finish the herb garden today, final plantings tomorrow, inspection on Friday. Payment terms remain as contracted. Please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, Gabriel. Your aunt orchestrated a very effective demonstration of reality. I'm grateful, actually. It reminded me why I keep professional boundaries. I didn't want— It doesn't matter what you wanted. It matters what happened. She finally met his eyes. You hesitated. When Victoria and her friends dismissed me, you hesitated before defending my presence. That hesitation is honest. You're torn between what you think you want and what your world expects. I don't blame you for that. But I can't be the person caught in the middle while you figure it out. I'm not torn. You are. You might not realize it yet, but you are. She softened her voice. Gabriel, you're a good man. You deserve someone who fits naturally into your life, who doesn't require you to constantly choose between your world and theirs. That's not me. We both know it. What if I don't want someone who fits naturally? What if I want someone who challenges me? Challenges are romantic until they become daily life. Then they're just exhausting. She picked up her spade. 4 days, Gabriel. Let's finish this properly. He looked like he wanted to argue further. Instead, he nodded slowly and left her to work. For 3 days, they maintained painful politeness. He consulted on placement decisions. She provided professional updates. They avoided any conversation deeper than soil composition and watering schedules. The gardens came together beautifully, a testament to weeks of careful planning and harder work. The native plantings would bloom in waves throughout the season. The roses would frame the views without dominating them. The herb garden would provide kitchen supplies and medicinal plants. The bees would thrive in their orchard home. It was exactly what she'd promised to create. On Thursday afternoon, with 1 day remaining, Beatrice arrived with a final blow. Miss Finch. She found Margot planting the last of the kitchen herbs. Might I have a word? Margot stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Of course, Lady Beatrice. I wanted to commend you on the gardens. They're quite serviceable. Thank you. I also wanted to apologize if my behavior has seemed harsh. Beatrice's expression was carefully sympathetic. You must understand. I've been concerned about my nephew. He's been vulnerable since Catherine's death, susceptible to inappropriate attachments. I assure you there's no attachment, my dear girl, of course there is, on both sides. Beatrice smiled kindly. But surely you see it cannot progress further. Gabriel is a Viscount. He has responsibilities to his name, his estates, his legacy. He needs a wife who understands those obligations. A wife who can navigate society, produce heirs, manage a household of this complexity. Each word was a knife, precisely placed. I'm not pursuing marriage with your nephew, Margot said quietly. Perhaps not consciously. But proximity breeds affection, and affection breeds hope. Beatrice's voice dropped to gentle firmness. Hope is cruel when it's impossible, Miss Finch. I've seen Gabriel watching you. I've seen him soften in ways that worry me, because this cannot end well for either of you. I'm aware. Are you? Beatrice moved closer. Because Gabriel is kind. If he believes you harbor expectations, he might try to fulfill them out of misplaced obligation. He might even propose despite knowing it would be disaster. And then you would face a choice: accept and spend your life failing to meet impossible standards, or refuse and carry the guilt of breaking his heart. Margot's throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because I believe you care for him. Genuinely. Beatrice's expression was almost sincere. And if you care, you'll finish your work tomorrow and leave without complicating his life further. Let him find an appropriate match. Let yourself find a man of your own station. Give you both the chance at happiness rather than the guarantee of struggle. She left before Margot could formulate a response. Margot stood in the kitchen garden she'd so carefully planned, surrounded by rosemary and thyme and sage, and faced the terrible truth. Beatrice was right. Not about Margot's worth or Gabriel's capacity for choice, but about the practical reality. Gabriel would propose out of kindness if given the chance. And Margot would face exactly that impossible choice: accept a life where she'd always be fighting to prove herself worthy, or refuse and hurt the first man she'd cared for in years. There was a third option: leave before he could propose, finish the work tonight instead of tomorrow, collect payment from the steward, board the early carriage to the next job before Gabriel realized she was gone, give them both a clean ending before things became irreparably complicated. It was practical, sensible, self-protective. It was absolutely the right choice. Margot worked until midnight, planting the final herbs by lamplight. She wrote a brief note for Gabriel explaining the early completion, left it with the steward along with her final invoice, and arranged to have her equipment collected the next day. By dawn Friday, she was packed and waiting for the carriage that would take her to her next contract, an estate garden in Surrey that would be far from Gabriel Thorne and impossible choices. The morning was grey and cool, carrying the scent of rain. The carriage arrived precisely on time. Margot loaded her trunk, accepted the driver's hand to climb aboard, and prepared to close the door on the past 6 weeks. Wait. The word was sharp, desperate, not at all like Gabriel's usual controlled tone. Margot froze, half in the carriage. Gabriel ran across the gravel drive, still in what looked like yesterday's clothes, hair disheveled, expression wild. Please. Wait. The driver looked between them uncertainly. Margot climbed back down because her traitorous body moved before her sensible mind could stop it. Gabriel, you were leaving. He stopped 3 feet away, breathing hard. You were leaving without saying goodbye. The work is complete. The contract fulfilled. There's nothing left to... Don't, his voice cracked. Don't pretend this is just business. It has to be just business. It's the only way this works. No, the only way this works is if we're honest. He moved closer. I love you. The words hit like lightning. Gabriel, don't... I love your sharp tongue and your dirty fingernails and the way you laugh when I murder innocent plants. I love how you see beauty in practical things and function in beautiful things. I love that you challenge me and respect me and refuse to let me hide behind propriety. He was shaking now. I love you, and I'm terrified you're about to leave because my aunt convinced you we're impossible. Margot's eyes burned. We are impossible. Why? Because society says so? Because Beatrice says so? Because you're afraid? Because you hesitated. The words burst out. At the benefit, when those women dismissed me, you hesitated before defending me. Because part of you knows Beatrice is right. I don't fit your world, Gabriel. I never will. I hesitated because I'm a coward, not because you're lacking. He closed the remaining distance between them. I've spent 5 years being what everyone expected, playing the proper Viscount, making appropriate choices, living a life that felt like a performance. And then you arrived, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be myself. That's not love. That's relief. It's both. He caught her hands. Margot, I don't want appropriate. I don't want a wife who knows which fork to use and how to curtsy to duchesses. I want someone who argues with me about soil composition and laughs at my botanical incompetence and makes me feel alive instead of adequate. Your aunt will never accept. I don't need her acceptance. I need yours, his voice steadied. I'm asking you, begging you, for one last chance, to prove this isn't proximity or novelty or anything temporary, to show you that choosing you is the least complicated decision I've ever made. Tears spilled down Margot's cheeks. Gabriel, you don't understand what you're asking. Your life would become so much harder. My life is already hard. At least with you it would be hard in ways that matter. He brushed her tears with his thumbs, impossibly gentle. Stay, or let me come with you. Or tell me to wait 6 months while you take other jobs and think about it. Just don't disappear because you're convinced we're doomed. People are watching. Her voice was barely a whisper. Let them watch. She looked past him and saw it was true. Servants in the windows, gardeners by the side path, and emerging from the house, Beatrice with several morning callers. Gabriel, this will cause scandal. Good. I'm tired of living life to avoid scandal. He raised his voice, not quite shouting but loud enough to carry. I'm in love with the woman who redesigned my gardens. She's brilliant and difficult, and completely unsuitable by every social measure, and I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life learning her trade and failing spectacularly at all of it. Gasps from the watching audience. Beatrice's face went absolutely white. Margot laughed through her tears. You're insane. Probably. Is it working? The public declaration or the profession of love? Both. Either. I'm desperate, Margot. So I'm not above begging. She looked at him, really looked at him. His rumpled clothes and wild hair and absolute sincerity. The way he held her hands like she might vanish. The complete lack of hesitation now, in front of his aunt and her friends and half his staff. He wasn't holding back, wasn't weighing options, wasn't choosing safety over risk. If I stay, she said slowly, I don't become a different person. I still wear work trousers and have dirt under my fingernails and say things that will horrify your aunt. I wouldn't have you any other way. If I stay, I'm still running my business, taking contracts, working with my crew. I'll defend your right to do so against anyone who questions it. If I stay, we court properly. No rushing into anything. I need to be sure. We both need to be sure. This is real. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. He smiled slightly. Though I should mention I've been sure since approximately week 2, when you laughed at me getting attacked by bees. That was the moment. That was one of many moments. The real moment was earlier, when you called me catastrophically incompetent at gardening and meant it as statement of fact rather than insult. Despite everything, the watching audience, the impossible situation, the terror and hope warring in her chest, Margot laughed. You're ridiculous. Is that a yes? She looked at the carriage waiting behind her, looked at the safe, sensible life she'd planned, looked at the practical choice that would protect her heart and her business and her carefully constructed independence, then looked back at Gabriel, at his desperate hope and genuine love and complete willingness to be ridiculed by his own social class for the chance to be with her. It's a cautious, terrified, probably going to regret this yes, she said. His smile could have lit entire counties. I'll take it. He kissed her right there in the gravel drive, in front of Beatrice and her scandalized friends and the delighted servants and anyone else who cared to watch. It was completely inappropriate, absolutely perfect. When they finally broke apart, Margot was dizzy and laughing and possibly crying again. Your aunt is going to make our lives miserable, she whispered. Let her try. He rested his forehead against hers. I've got 6 weeks of evidence that you're impossible to defeat. 5 weeks and 5 days. Stand corrected, as always. He pulled back slightly, grew more serious. Margot, truly, are you sure? Because once this becomes public, there's no taking it back. Are you sure, she countered, because I come with debts and a business and absolutely no idea how to be a viscountess. Then we'll learn together. He caught her hand. Come back inside? At least long enough to explain to my steward why he shouldn't release your final payment since you're not actually leaving. Practical of you. I'm learning from the best. He turned toward the house, keeping her hand firmly in his. Beatrice blocked their path, face rigid with fury. Gabriel, this is beyond your control. Yes. He met her eyes calmly. Aunt, I loved Edward. I'm grateful you helped me navigate those first years after his death. But I'm done living his life instead of mine. Miss Finch makes me happy. If you cannot accept that, you're welcome to return to your own estate. You're throwing away everything for a common. Careful. Gabriel's voice went cold. The next word you choose will determine whether we ever speak again. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Beatrice drew herself up. You'll regret this. Perhaps. But it will be my regret to carry. He softened fractionally. Aunt, I'm not asking for your approval, but I am asking for basic respect. Can you give me that much? Beatrice looked between them, calculation warring with fury. I need time, she said finally. Don't expect miracles. I don't. I expect civility. She turned and swept back into the house without another word. The morning callers scattered like startled birds. Margot released a shaky breath. That went better than I expected. Really? That's your standard for better? She didn't throw anything. I'm calling it a win. She looked up at him. Gabriel, you do realize this is going to be complicated? Immensely. Society will gossip. Undoubtedly. Your friends may disapprove. Some will. Dr. Morrison thinks I'm finally using my brain. He pulled her closer. Margot, I've lived 5 years trying to please everyone. It made me miserable. I'd rather be happy with you and disappointing to society than appropriate and empty without you. That's very romantic. Is it working? Unfortunately, yes. She rested her head against his shoulder. I must be getting soft. Normally I'm much more practical about these things. I like you impractical. I'm still going to make you learn proper pruning technique. Wouldn't dream of avoiding it. They stood in the morning sunlight, wrapped in each other, while the gardens she'd created bloomed around them. It wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And that, Margot decided, was worth fighting for. 3 months later, the gardens were in full summer glory. Margot stood in the kitchen garden checking the herb growth when Gabriel emerged from the house carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. Your savory is trying to take over the time again. Herbs are territorial. They'll sort themselves out. He handed her a glass. Dr. Morrison sent word. His colleague in Devon wants to discuss a garden redesign. Apparently word has spread about the controversial Viscountess-to-be who creates ecosystems. I haven't agreed to be a Viscountess yet. You've been wearing my grandmother's ring for 6 weeks. I'm testing it, making sure it fits properly. She smiled at his expression. Gabriel, we agreed. Slow courtship, proper time to be certain. It's been 3 months, I'm certain. You've been certain since week 2, apparently. I'm more cautious. What would make you certain? She considered the question seriously. I need to know we can weather actual problems. So far it's been relatively smooth. Your friends have been surprisingly accepting. My clients haven't fled despite the scandal. Even Beatrice has achieved basic civility. You want me to manufacture problems? I want to know what happens when real life intrudes. When I take a contract that means being gone for weeks. When you have a state business that consumes your time. When we argue about something more serious than plant placement. She set down her lemonade. I need to know. We can be partners in actual life, not just in a romantic bubble. That's remarkably practical. Someone has to be. You're too busy being besotted. Guilty. He caught her hand. Margot, we could wait 5 years, and I'd still feel exactly the same. But if you need time to be sure, take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. What if I'm gone for 6 weeks on a project? Then I'll write terrible love letters and pine dramatically in your absence. What if we discover we drive each other mad with daily proximity? Then we'll argue loudly and make up thoroughly. He grinned. I rather enjoy our arguments. You enjoy when I'm right. Which is always, apparently. She laughed, the sound bright in the summer air. The gardens around them hummed with life. Bees in the roses, birds in the fruit trees, the scent of thyme and lavender and sage mixing with fresh-cut grass. Everything she'd promised to create, thriving exactly as planned, including, somehow, this. Ask me again at Christmas, she said finally. If we survive autumn and estate management and my accepting 3 more contracts, ask me again. December 25th? Dramatically impractical, but sure. I'll mark my calendar. He pulled her closer. In the meantime, I believe you promised to teach me about companion planting. I believe you promised to stop planting things upside down. I make no such promises. Where's the romance in competence? Gabriel Thorne, you are a disaster with plants. But I'm your disaster. Unfortunately true. She kissed him, soft and certain. Now come on. Those tomatoes won't train themselves. They walked hand in hand toward the vegetable garden, arguing cheerfully about proper staking technique. Behind them, the gardens bloomed, and Margot, who'd built her life on practical choices and protected independence, found herself thinking that sometimes the impractical choice was the one worth making. Sometimes the risk was the reward, and sometimes love looked like dirt under your fingernails and bees in the orchard, and a man who learned your trade badly but tried anyway. Not simple, never easy, but entirely impossibly perfectly real. Thank you for staying until the end of Margot and Gabriel's story. If their journey moved you, if you found yourself hoping for her courage or his choice, I hope it reminded you that the right person will choose you publicly, defend you consistently, and learn to speak your language, even when they fail at it spectacularly. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support makes these stories possible. Hit that bell to be notified when the next story arrives,